Hello and welcome to wakilsahab.com. So we are having All India Bar Exam refresher course right now, and today we are going to be getting a lecture on the topic Civil Procedure Code by Advocate Riaz from Hyderabad. So Mr. Riaz has done his undergraduate degree, that is a 5 years LLB from Government College from Usmania University campus, and subsequently he got a merit rank, and he's again studying in Usmania University main campus, a government college, and he's studying constitutional law. So he is a researcher. He has many published papers in many journals, and he's been practicing law mainly on the civil, on the criminal and the criminal side for the past 1 year. And we are very thankful to Mr. Riaz. Mr. Riaz, welcome to this your session.
Welcome, Mr. Riaz.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, what I'll do is I'll give it now to Mr. Riaz, and let me. Uh, okay, so yes, sir, Mr. Riaz, you can go ahead and share the screen, and we will follow accordingly.
Am I able to do that?
Yes. Do you have the option of sharing the screen?
No, I don't have that. I'm trying to do that, but it's saying that host disabled,
Okay,
participants sharing screen.
Okay. Can you do it now? Please check out.
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
So we will be starting our discussion over CPC. So basically, having gained about 1 year of experience about that, I think I would be able to give you some basic idea about the procedure aspect, because many a time in our LLB, our course is designed in a way that we deal a lot about substantive law. And in the last semester, we discussed about civil procedure code. So while having gone into the practice, I really learned about what is the value of the procedural law. Not just by knowing about substantive law, it will not be able for you to practice, because the procedure is the most important thing. So basically, the CPC deals with the procedure aspect in a civil matters. That's it, the basic idea. So in this case of CPC, that is of 1908, that is about the Britishers have drafted it. So the basic classification of CPC is like section 1 to section 158. This is a very, I should say, a very index aspect of the classification, I should say, not subjective. Then it comes to the orders, that is order 1 to order 52. That is I should say how the Bail Act is being divided. So you can see on the screen that in what way the Bail Act is being divided. So we will move on to the very few aspects of that is important as per AIB examination, because I have gone through the papers few. So as per the AIB examination, they are not going into the details of the subject. They're not going to they are just asking you where is what and what is being placed. Am I audible to everyone?
Yes,
I want to clarify that.
Yeah, yes, clear.
Yeah. So when we go to the before going into the discussion about that, I would like to know that what is the source of my reading about CPC. Is about the CPC by Brahma Sastri. It is also a good book. Another is that like in Key to Indian Practice by Mullah. It is an abridged version for the primary level. I'm saying for the preliminary level of understanding about CPC. Just once you understand about CPC, where is what, then you will be able to understand the whole structure of that CPC. First, you need to go through with the once or twice, that's it. On the third reading, you will be able to understand what actually it is trying to say. And with regard to the AIP examination, I would say that they're not expecting you to read each and every topic or remember each and every topic. Just you need to read, and you should know that where is what, that's it. Because it will be difficult for you to remember everything. So we will move on to the subject. The primary reading is that CPC by Prabrahma Sastri, and then the CPC by Key to Indian Practice by Mullah. So when we go with the preliminary level, that is, it says about the definition.
I would request, group members kindly keep your, mics muted, please.
Yeah. Hello, should I
Yes,
start now? Yeah.
yes, please.
So the most important thing is about the jurisprudence, jurisdiction of that is being explicitly mentioned in the BERAC itself, that where it is being applicable. Uh, it is applicable all over India except state of Nagaland and tribal areas of Nagaland. This could be a bit question that could be asked. And with regard to with the abrogation of Article 370, the CPC might be applicable to Jammu and Kashmir also. And with regard to the Nagaland, all those things, these Nagaland tribal states have been given a very different provisions under Article 370 of Indian Constitution. That's the reason why it is not being applicable. If you read Indian Constitution, Article 371, from Article 371, that goes on the special privileges that are being given to the different states. You could understand why the CPC is mentioning Article Section 2, and their subclause are that, like state of Nagaland and the tribal areas. Then you have the specific tribal areas of Assam at the same time, and these East Godavari and West Godavari, these are all are tribal agency areas. There they have their own local laws that are being protected under Constitution. So all the procedural aspects are need to be applicable on them with the permission of the governor, and also the same on the recommendation. The president will be applying that on the recommendation of governor. So this could be a very big question that they might ask you. Then comes the definition of a decree, the most important definition, because this decree will be coming in each and every provision of CPC. Now and then discusses about what is decree. So once you get to know about what is decree and what are kinds of decree, then it will be easy for you to understand the usage of this word. What is the meaning of this word specifically that is being discussed in the coming provisions of CPC. So by reading, you would understand decree means a formal expression of an adjudication which, so far as regarded the expression, conclusively determines the rights of the parties with regard to or any of the matter in the controversy. So here, if we divide this whole provision in that, we could divide it into three formats. Or any of the matter in the controversy in the suit, or maybe either preliminary or final, it shall be deemed to include rejection of plaint and determination of any question within section 144, but does not include any adjudication from which an appeal lies as an appeal from an order, or any order of dismissal for default. So here, if you go through with the decree, the word decree as such, you could understand it is a very elaborate. Decree is not just about one thing. Primarily, it is about the adjudication of rights between the parties. That is the one definition it could be. Or it could be any one of the right that is preliminary to the suit, primary issue that was there. Once the suit starts, the court will first decides the primary questions or primary issues. Once that primary issues, once the court adjudicates the primary issues, then they will be taking up another few issues that are not primary in nature. So once the primary decree is being given, or once the primary issues are being decided in that is known as a preliminary degree. So now this preliminary degree has a totally different rules and regulations. Like once a preliminary degree is being decided by the court, if you are not going to appeal upon that decree, then you will lose a chance to appeal that in the appellate court. Even if you are going to apply or appeal that complete degree, but the preliminary degree, you won't be able to do that, because you have to do it then and there within that regulation that is of 90 days time period. So coming to the next is about rejection of plaint. Like you have in the orders, there is a separate provision in the plaint, like in order 6 rule 39, I think it speaks about on what grounds there should be a rejection of plaint. Once there is a rejection of plaint, then the matter has been adjudicated. So the procedure will be different. You will not be able to bring that new suit on the same issues. That is a difference between. That's why they have mentioned it, execution of plate, and then section 144. So section 144 is the most important thing that deals with restitution. So restitution is also a new topic, a totally different topic. See, this one decree definition gives you a very elaborate, it deals with a number of things. That is what I'm trying to say. And it does not deal with any of the appeals, any adjudication from which an appeal lies as an appeal from an order. So when you are going to read order 41, you would be able to understand what is the difference between the appeal from an order. So when we are going to discuss, we will be dealing that. And again, then any order of dismissal for default. So now dismiss for default, the court will be deciding few things on merits, and few things are dismissed on default. With regard to the dismiss of default, there could be like the failure if the party failed to pay the court fees, or if they fail to pay the requisite fees for the summons and for the summons for the other side. If they fail to do that, the suit will be dismissed for default. So in that case, that default will not be considered as a decree. Then we will move on further to the understanding of decree holder. I think we all know about what is decree holder, the one who owns, one who, in whose favor the decree has, like the court has, if the court has adjudicated on that in his favor, then he will be considered as decree holder. This is the more important thing that I would like to discuss. The decree was the most important thing. Now we will move on to the next discussion of yeah, we will go with the two important topics of our discussion. That is section 9, that is a definition of suit. So once you get the definition of what is a civil suit, then you could understand what all areas that are coming under the civil adjudication. So section 9 primarily speaks about the what all matters can be discussed or can be adjudicated under the civil court. So if you read the very words of the section 9, this will be helpful for you to understand what is it all about. I will read from the book so that you can check out from that. So section 9 is that the court shall, subject to the provisions herein contained, have a jurisdiction to try all suits of civil nature excepting the suits of which their cognizance is either explicitly or impliedly barred. So which means that every civil matter can be taken up by the civil court except the following exceptions. The following exceptions are: section 10 speaks about the bar by bar on civil suit. Then section 11 speaks about the res judicata. So we will try to discuss few things in detail with regard to these things, like what is res judicata and what is bar on the suit. Section 10 speaks about the stay of the suit. This could be a if the bit is going to come in this way, that section 10 deals with what kind of legal doctrine, like section 11 deals with which kind of doctrine. So res judicata is very much famous in our journalism also. Many a time whenever there is an interview of political in nature, and if there is a suit in that case, then people abstain from discussing because it is a sub judice matter or something. They abstain from doing that. The reason for which is that because of these two doctrines, that is sub judice and res judicata. So res judicata is like, it's prohibit. Basically, I will read that what section 10 says about. No court shall proceed with the trial of any suit in which the matter in issue is directly and substantially in issue, is previously instituted between the same parties or between the parties under whom they or any of them claiming litigating under the same title Sorry, I will give you that. Yeah, here it is. Or any court in which having jurisdiction to grant relief, claim, or any court beyond the limits of India established or continued by central government and having like jurisdiction or before the Supreme Court. Here there are three important words that we need to focus before for understanding this provision. The first is first two words are directly and substantially. So many a time what happens that there are few issues that are accidentally coming into discussion. But to apply this doctrine, that is stay on the suit that are coming after the suits that are being filed. Suppose there is a one suit between the two parties. Again, one of them who is a defendant in the previous suit is coming as a plaintiff in the next suit. So now, as per this doctrine, stay of the suit, if no court shall proceed with the trial of any suit, here, if the present suit is coming up through the same title, and the issues are all of same, that is direct and substantially with that previously instituted suit. Here, previously instituted suit is being mentioned. So now, what the court says, what this doctrine says, that no court shall proceed with the trial of any suit. So here, the institution of that suit is not being prohibited. Only the trial is being prohibited. So if the plaintiff of that former suit or previous suit, the defendant of the previous suit comes and file a suit against the plaintiff of that previous suit, he can file, but there is no chance of trial. So what will happen? They will be clubbing that two suits when there is a chance, when there will be a trial. At the same time, to club that, it is important that the issues that are being discussed in those two suits should be directly and substantially in nature. If they are discussing incidentally, then there is no chance of applying this doctrine. And at the same time, the court should have a jurisdiction. Many a time what happens, the court will be dealing with the issues which they don't have a jurisdiction. So to apply this doctrine of stay of suit, or should say bar of the suit, is that there should be a issue between the two suits. At the same time, it should be substantial and directly in nature. If incidentally they are being discussed, incidentally they are the part of that suit, the issues, then there is no question of applying this. Then they should be of between the same parties and at the same time between the same title. So here the title word means like if the suit is being decided by my purchaser, and if I am going and claiming the same thing what my purchaser have lost, then I would not be able to do that, because already the court have decided the issues, because my title is dependent on that purchasers. I am bounded by the proceedings of that court. And at the same time, to apply this doctrine, the court should have a jurisdiction to deal with that issues. If the court does not have a jurisdiction, then you are open to discuss, you are open to proceed, and court is not bounded by section 10, sorry. Then we will move on to the most important, that is res judicata. No court shall try any suit or issue in which the matter directly or indirectly in issue has been directly and substantially in issue in a former suit between the parties or between the parties under whom they or any of them claiming, litigating under the same title in a court competent to try such subsequent suit, or the suit in which such issue has been subsequently raised and has been heard and finally decided by such court. So in a very layman language, once a suit has been decided on those issues, the court has been adjudicated, there is no chance of deciding. The court will not be revisiting those, it will not be adjudicating again those issues. So for this doctrine to be applicable, it is like, first thing is that again, directly and substantially in issue, the same title, and the court should have jurisdiction, and court will not revisit on these issues. So what is the option? The person has to go with the appeal. They have to appeal these. If there is a decision that he is not satisfied with that decree, he cannot revisit, ask the court to revisit on that or review that. They have to go to the appellant court. Then these are the two doctrines. So just I would like to have a review from you people, that are you able to follow me, or you are getting bored, or am I confusing you? It will be better for me to understand.
Anyone who's filing a case or petition, that would go by default through a jurisdiction where, right? So why are we specifically mentioning directly or indirectly or substantially? There should be, the court will check the jurisdiction is there or not. That point, I think I got little stuck. If you can clarify, it would be more, better.
So jurisdiction as such will be having there are types of jurisdiction, right? See, if I am unable to, please repeat the question. It will give me a more clarity.
You mentioned, can you just go to the res juridica, that point? I will just
wait. Yeah. Yes.
A little top where we were talking about directly or substantially about,
Yes.
This one, the stay of suit. So no court shall proceed with the trial of any suit in which the matter in issue is also directly or substantially an issue in a previously instituted suit between the same parties or between
Parties under whom.
Correct. So over here, as a layman, okay, I understand that if I have to file a suit or a petition, I will have to certainly file a case where there is a jurisdiction, right?
Yes.
But since I'm new to it, I'm failing to understand. There would there be any types of jurisdiction that has to meet certain criteria?
Yes.
Okay, fine.
Because upon listening you, I could understand that for you, the jurisdiction is of only about territoriality. But jurisdiction is of there is a pecuniary jurisdiction, there is original jurisdiction, and at the same time, the word here, it's coming the relief claimed. So many a time we present before the court, but they don't have the authority to give that kind of relief. Let's take an example. Like if I go to the rent control, right? Rent control does not have a right of eviction. When I go to a civil court has a right of eviction. In rent control, you have to prove that there is a genuine cause that you want to evict your tenant. But whereas when you are going with the CPC, with regard to the CPC as such, in the civil court has that if you are going to ask for that specific relief, they will be able to give that. The same relief will not be able to be given by the the rent control. So there is a difference between the jurisdiction and at the same time relief. That's why here the word, what it says, just I will read, you will get the clarity of that. Or any other court in India having jurisdiction to grant the relief claimed. If this stay of suit need to be applied, then the person who is going to file that suit, and if someone is going to say that I will be applying, if the court officer is going to say that the stay of suit, bar of the suit will be applied on the suit, because the same issues are being discussed in that previously instituted suit under so and so court established under so and so. But if I could establish that the shoes are same, the shoes in this suit that I am presenting at the same time that is being previously instituted by another party is the same. But the relief that I am claiming under this suit is different from that court. At the same time, this court is having an authority or having a jurisdiction to grant me that relief, but the same relief cannot be granted by that court, the court that is dealing with the previous suit. Hope I am able to clear you.
Yeah.
If not, I will try to simplify that.
No. I think to an extent I was able to understand. Thank you.
Because jurisdiction is not just about the pecuniary jurisdiction, not just about territorial jurisdiction. You have pecuniary jurisdiction, you have original jurisdiction, and at the same time that the statute itself, what kind of relief that allows the court to give. Now we will move to the res judicata has been discussed. Res judicata clearly it clearly bars the suit, because once it has been decided, no court has an authority to open the case or open the issue. Again, they cannot adjudicate on that. Now we will move on to the few another topics, because these are the foreign courts and foreign judgments. I think I don't find a question of that, and at the same time, these are too complicated to understand in the overview, because the title itself of the lecture was, and we are trying to give you an overview of that. So we will go with the subject matter. Here is the most important. Section 16 speaks about what areas are going to be discussed, or what areas are going to be a part of civil suit. Here it comes that subject to the pecuniary or the limitations prescribed by any law. So here the or prescribed by any law, which means again you have to go through the another acts, like Limitation Act is there that discusses about limitations over these civil suits. And pecuniary jurisdiction that comes under the civil procedure rules are there, CRPC. Civil rules of procedure are there. There you will be getting that pecuniary jurisdiction aspect. But with regard to the subject matter, this is also a kind of jurisdiction which says that for the recovery of immovable property with or without rent or profit, for partition of property, foreclosure, sale or redemption in case of a mortgage or charge upon immovable property, for the determination of any rights, any other rights to or interest in the immovable property, for compensation for wrong to an immovable property, for the recovery of movable property according under distance and attachments, shall be instituted in a court within the local limits of whose jurisdiction the property is situated. So now here you get what kind of substantive law will be applied here with regard to the immovable property. If you go with the recovery of immovable property, then your whole Transfer of Property Act will be coming into picture. If you are going to, as the word itself is a procedure in nature. So if you want to understand, if you want to apply this provision, that recovery of immovable property, then you have to have a basic understanding or basic idea about CPC. That is the most important thing. At the same time, an idea of a specific relief act. And then comes the sale, foreclosure, sale and redemption. Here you come with the Transfer of Property Act Part 2, I think so, in which you have discussed, there is a discussion about foreclosure and the mortgages. The partition, this is about your personal laws, Hindu Succession Act, then Muslim personal law comes into picture. Then if there is a Christian, then you have Indian Succession Act that will be coming into picture. Now when it comes to any other right determination, so here comes the easementary rights are there, any other, because they say that any other right, you have easement rights, you have few to say, like Specific Relief Act also says about few other rights. Next comes the compensation for a wrong to an immovable property. Here comes your law of torts, because law of torts have all those wrong to the property. You have those few concepts are there. I will not go into the detail. Then we will move on to the recovery of movable property. Here it comes the Sale of Goods Act. You have to you should get a basic idea about that. There is again proviso here, provided that a suit to obtain relief respecting or compensation for a wrong to immovable property held by or on behalf of a defendant may, where the relief sought can be entirely obtained through his personal obedience, be suited either in the court within the local limits of whose jurisdiction the property is situated, or in a court within local limits of whose jurisdiction the defendant actually or voluntarily resides or carries on business, personally works or gains. So here by reading it, you could understand this is about territorial jurisdiction. Here they are saying that the suit can be brought before the jurisdiction where the wrong has been committed or where the defendant is residing. This is about the jurisdiction, the subject matter that play. Now we will move on. I have divided that. Let me take my notes, that will be helpful. So we are done with the definition of suit, that is section 9, then stay of suit. Achha, one more thing with regard to the section 10, that is a stay of suit. The basic idea of that is that to avoid the conflicting decisions of the court having concurrent jurisdiction. The basic idea, if you read that section 10 itself, is a very elaborative that we discussed about section 10. The basic idea, if you want to, what is the reasoning behind that, is that to avoid the conflicting decisions of a courts having concurrent jurisdiction. So with regard to doctrine of res judicata, we have discussed about in section 11. So if you want to understand in a more elaborative manner, that is res judicata, you have to understand the doctrine of estoppel. So doctrine of estoppel comes under the Evidence Act. The basic doctrine of estoppel says that if I have admitted something that I have done, or I have something, some fact in issue, I have accepted that, and that is not in existence or that is false, and after the further trial I come before the court and say that no, what I have accepted was wrong and it was not in existence, the court will not allow that. The court will say that once you have said that, or once you have accepted that, court presumes that you are having it. You will not be able to retract from your admission or your statement. So this is an estoppel. Estoppel and res judicata had few similarities, at the same time few differences. So one difference between res judicata and estoppel is that res judicata bars on a court. It says that court will not be indulging or will not be dealing again with the fact. The fact in it will not be adjudicating the things that they have already adjudicated. But estoppel imposes on a party. It says that party will not be able to go beyond the statement that they have said. They cannot contradict the statement that they have said before what they are saying now. Now we will move on to the important thing, that is the placing of suit. The section 16 we have done. Section 19 is also important. Section 19, if you read section 19, it's when we have read about libel, and many a time in our law schools, our professors used to say that there are few crimes that are civil in nature, at the same time they are criminal in nature. So one such crime is the libel, or libel is one such crime. Just by reading you could understand what it says. Compensation for wrong, suit for compensation for wrong to person or movable. I will read that. Where a suit is for compensation for a wrong done to the person or to a movable property, if the wrong was done within local limits of a jurisdiction of one court and the defendant resides or carries on business or personally works for gain within the local limits of the jurisdiction of another court, the suit may be instituted at the option of the plaintiff in either of the said court. So here, as if you go with the examples, you could understand the example 1 is the same example of IPC, that is battery. A suit residing, A residing in Delhi beats B in Calcutta. B may sue A either in Calcutta or in Delhi. So here, the second example is like A residing in Delhi publishes in Calcutta statement defamatory of B. B may sue A either in Calcutta or in Delhi. So these two these two illustrations comes under criminal law also, IPC. The illustration A is about battery or hurting someone, or if something like there is a division, again they have divided in IPC that grievous, hurt and hurt. Then here you go with the defamation, or you could by reading the section 19, it could be a libel also. So you could understand what we have read in a substantive law. In torts, there is a chance of defamation. In torts, we have learned about defamation, right? So here, what we have learned in torts, they are giving you a procedure to get the compensation. if to give you an interesting, to make the procedural law interesting, I'm trying to relate these things with the procedural law with the substantive law. Then we will move on to the few important things, because it will be difficult for to deal with each and everything. We will go with the section 21 and section 21A. This is also most important thing with regard to the procedural aspect, at the same time with regard to the practice aspect. Just I will read, or let wait for it. So section 1 is with regard to the objection to the jurisdiction. Section 21 is about objection to jurisdiction. Then section 10 is about bar to a suit. Section 11 is about res judicata. So here you could understand the series, the sections are being arranged in such a manner that all the sections are directly or indirectly dealing with the jurisdiction or jurisdiction aspects. One section is dealing with the subject matter of the jurisdiction, someone is dealing with the pecuniary jurisdiction. So just I am trying to interrelate the each and every section. That is the motive, because I am discussing all these things. I will read that. No objection as to the place of the suit, or no objection as to the place of suing shall be allowed by an appellant or a revisional court unless such objection was taken in the court of first instance at the earliest possible opportunity, and in all cases where the suits are settled at or before such settlement, or unless there has been a consequence failure of justice. In a very layman language, you are not allowed to, if there is a suit between A and B and there is a issue of jurisdiction, that to whatever court that A have approached, that court does not have a jurisdiction. Now the court has been adjudicated, the first instance of court, let's take a junior court has adjudicated that in favor of A. Then B has gone to appeal that. Now B has realized that that junior court is not having a jurisdiction to deal with these issues. At this point of time, at this juncture, the B will not be able to challenge the court challenge this decree by saying that this court does not have a jurisdiction, based on that, because it is his duty to take up this issue at the first court of instance. There is one legal doctrine that we have read in our legal magazines, that law will help those who are aware about their rights. Law will not rescue to those who are not aware about that. So if you're going to remember that legal magazine, and if you're going to read this section 21, you would be able to understand that legal magazine is being incorporated in our statute. Now we will move on to section 21A. We will not go into the in details of that. Section 21A, which speaks about this is an amendment. Section 21A, bar on the suit to set aside a decree on objection as to place of the suing. No suit shall be laid challenging the validity of a suit passed in former suit between the same parties, or between the parties under whom they or any of them claim litigating under the same title on the ground based on the objection of the placing of the suit. Bar on a suit to set aside a decree on objection as to the placing of suit. So here again, with regard to the jurisdiction, if they have not raised that before, then they won't be able to do that after. So I would like to know from you that are you able to understand, or are you able to follow what I'm trying to say you? Because it is one of the dry subject. Hello?
Yeah, it's too dry.
Huh?
Subject is very dry.
Yeah. That is because I'm trying to help you out. That's it.
Correct. Seriously, to this extent, I was able to, put my thoughts as, I think the way you are narrating things, I'm able to infuse it, but otherwise, I think it's a pretty dry subject. Thanks so much.
Yeah. Just I will add one more thing. Like I will try to recommend you one book that is important for you. That's Key to Indian Practice by this Mullah. This is abridged version. In the very first preface, he says that to understand CPC, it is important that you need to understand few substantive laws. Then in that way, you will be able to enjoy the subject, because I will give you my personal opinion. When I was reading the substantive law, I thought that what is the use when I am unable to know how to implement that. So once I read about CPC, I could relate that. So there I could sense the power of enforceability. When we say that law has a power of enforceability, now I could relate, because by reading Transfer of Property Act, it's just about rights and duties of seller and buyer, or mortgage seller and buyer. But when you are going to read about these CPC, you will enjoy, or you will know what is the importance of this substantive law when you are aware about the procedural aspect. Once I will give you an example of what is the difference between an advocate and an intellectual or a professor. He will be good in substantive law. Advocate will be aware about the procedural aspect. That's why he's an advocate. So we will move on to the next subject, that is power to transfer suits which may be instituted in more than one suit. So here, if you, I will give you one example that many a time there are few big matters will be there, right? There will be a number of companies, they will be dealing all over India. So many a time there will be a number of suits that will be filed by the consumers or by the stakeholders in that issue. So here the court has been given a power to transfer that suit, power to transfer the suit which may be instituted in more than one area. If the company in Delhi, right, and he has a branch in Hyderabad, in some other cities, right? So someone in this all over India, something happens and some crisis develops in the company or between the two individuals or partners and so and so. So that there will be a chance for a person who wants relief, then he can file a case in Delhi at the same time in Hyderabad also, because the transaction, because the sale has taken place from Hyderabad and then completed in Delhi. So as per the contract or some other substantive law, he will be having jurisdiction on both. So this person who is a defendant in the case could apply to the court and say that kindly transfer or kindly reinstitute that the suit that is being dealt, that can be dealt by both the jurisdiction. We wish to deal with the Delhi, so Delhi jurisdiction. So here section 22 will be helping the plaintiff to come into picture. Now we will move on to the section 24, because see 23 is in relation to 22. By reading that you will be able to understand. Again, they are dealing with the which court can apply and what grounds it could be applied. I request that hopefully you will be able to, I don't expect that you will be able to remember what I am saying, but I want you to just make you understand or make it easy for you to read CPC, because by listening to a lecture, it will be difficult to remember or to carry the thought until unless you try to read. So it's like a window to CPC, accept my lecture in that way. It is a window to a CPC, that's it. We will move on. Yeah, we will move on to the few things with regard to the grounds of transfer and withdrawal. You will be able to understand. I will not be going in detail of that. I will go with section 26. This is the most important. This goes, just wait for a while. Here it comes. Every suit shall be instituted by the presentation of a plaint or any other manner as may be prescribed. So basically, whenever we are going to file our plaint, that is the first step in the civil procedure, in the civil mechanism, is you will be filing your plaint. So what will be the, excuse me. So under what section the plaint will be filed? Section 26, read with order 7. Yeah, order 7 will be dealing with the plaint. So if you want to really have a hold over CPC, then there is a format to remember these things, that section 26, order 7, rule 1. Remembering section, then order, then rule 1, because the whole thought in the CPC is constructed in that way only. Sections dealing with the just dealing with the concepts, then orders will be orders are like collection of relevant rules. So rule will be dealing with in specific. Then you have the civil rules of practice. that is like a most important document for a lawyer, practicing lawyer, because that will be dealing with a very microscopic discussions, like how the affidavit need to be filed and where the signature to be done. In that way, that will be dealing. That is the most important. That's just I'm adding you, adding the subject, adding the knowledge over the subject. So the method of reading, or even your AIB exam paper is also asking in that way only. So and so order deals with what kind of rules, like order 7 deals with plaint, order 8 deals with your WS set off and counterclaims, then order 39 deals with perpetual injunctions, then order 21 deals with executive petitions, then interpleaded suits are there. Just I'm giving you what all things are there in the in CPC. So we will move on to the next discussion. Institution of suit is very simple, but order 7 discusses this section 26 in detail. That is what I am trying to say you. In the same way, order 1 is there. It discusses about the jurisdiction again in detail. Order 2 says that if the plaint is being filed, then there is a provision for rejection of plaint. On what grounds there should be a rejection of plaint? That is order 2, rule 2. Then on what grounds the rejection should be, the plaint to be returned. There is a difference between rejection and return of a plaint. So here, if you are going to read from section 1 to section 25, you will be understanding that the one concept that goes on is the jurisdiction. Again, when you go with the orders, order 1 to order 6, not until order 3, I should say under order 3, it discusses about the jurisdiction. So once you are able to understand these sections and these rules, again it becomes very interesting to discuss. We will move to the next topic is about power to order discovery and like. This is the very, I should say that this is the weapon of a lawyer. Or if you really want to get something out of something substantial that the other side is trying to conceive and he is not disclosing that, this is this section 30, section 30. If we are able to use this in a very proper, see section 30, you have to understand section 30 with the section, there is a specific order that deals with this kind of discoveries and inquiries. There is a provision, there is a specific rule is there, that is order 13. Order 30, section 30, order 13, which deals with the discoveries, impoundings and return of documents. We will be discussing, sorry for that, this is about sorry for correction, order 11, order 11, discoveries and inspection. Order 11 discusses about discovery. See, order 13, it says about discoveries, in what manner that has to be done, how it need to be done, and what will be the consequences of it on the suit on the other side is being discussed under order 11. So by correlating, after reading for about 3 months, I could able to understand the arrangement of the sections. This, once you understand the arrangement of sections, where is what, then it will be easy for you. It builds a confidence in you whenever you are going to talk on the subject. It gives you a confidence. That's what I want to say, that correlate whenever you are going to read the Bail Act, because if something is discussed under this section, that will be elaborated or that will be in contradiction, or that some section will be in exception to the above sections. Very much you will be coming across with this kind of provisions in the in our legal or I should say Bail Act, legal literature, I should say. Now just I will read the section 30. What it says that subject to the conditions and limitations. Very much, see, the word itself gives you subject to the conditions and limitations. So what are those conditions and limitations? By reading whole Bail Act, you will be understanding what are the subjects and conditions of this section. So this section is enabling section, but at the same time it has some kind of restrictions and some kind of provisos are there. And what are those provisos? You won't be finding that provisos by reading this section, but it says that we are accepting what all those exceptions are there in this act, bare act. Somewhere it will be there, and it is your responsibility to find out. That is the most important, the difficult task by when you are going to read these specific procedural laws. Subject to the such conditions and limitations as may be prescribed, the court may at any time, either on its motion or on the application of any party. So first thing is that section 30 is not limited to the court. It is not limited to the court's discretion. It can be used by the parties of the suit. So what it says that, let me read to you. Make such order as may be necessary or reasonable in the matter relating to the delivery and answer of the interrogatories. First thing, interrogatories. Then admission of documents. Second thing. Third thing is of facts, discoveries, inspections, production, impounding, returning of documents or other material objects producible as evidence. Issue summons to persons. B, that is B. Section 30, subclause B. Issue summons to persons whose attendance is required either to give evidence or to produce documents or such other objects as above said, or any fact to be proved by evidence. So now, see how powerful it is. It says that the court can enforce. See, if the other side is not disclosing the documents that are very much essential, and it is necessary for you to prove it is necessary that you should bring that evidence before the court to prove your claim. And now, if the other side is in possession of those documents and is not producing, because it will be benefiting you if he is going to produce. So once, if you file this application under section 30 under order 11, that is discoveries and inspection, if time permits and if there is a if I and you people are interested in the discussion, we will go on with the orders also. If order 9 and section 30 will be, if I'm going to file that, and I prove that there is the application is moved in the interest of justice, because reasonable and necessary, the word is coming, and if this application is allowed and court has asked him to produce those documents and those interrogatories are like questions that I want to raise before the other side. At the same time, there are few documents, impoundings, return of documents, and admissions of documents. See the nature, the words that I have used. Now, if this application is allowed by the court, and if the other side fails to bring all these things, and if they denied that they are not in possession of that, the effect of his statement of denying that he is not in, that these documents are not in his possession, or if he denies these things, what will be the consequences? Consequences will be of two natures. One will be that Evidence Act. It says that if something is being asked by the court and they won't be able to produce that, and if they come again to the court and says that, look, we are having this in the later stage, then court will not accept it as an evidence. First thing, even if it isn't genuine, I'm not able to remember or recollect that specific section, but it comes in the latter sections of CPC with regard to the burden of proof. It comes under the burden of proof chapter, I think. Yeah. Then the other consequence is that the other impact over the suit is that with regard to the admission of the document and the interrogatories, if the other side is not ready to answer these interrogatories, then order 9 give you another authority that court will be asking this person specifically to answer that. It is a discretion of the court. Either the court can say that, no, we will deal with this in the coming stages of the suit, like actual trial. But if you insist that it is in the interest of the court, and at the same time it will save the time of the court, and it is specific that these are the interrogatives, mere interrogatives that he need to answer. If the court specifically asked him to answer these questions, and if he abstained from doing that, the court has a power to dismiss the suit and can adjudicate in your favor. So these interrogatories are the most in this provision, and this I will just read out the passage of the Key to Indian Practice Mullah. He says that very less lawyers uses these provisions of CPC, and if they are going to use these provisions, it will save the time of the court, because when the court when there will be how it will happen, that there will be plaint will be filed, then WS in 3 months, then there will be petitions will be coming, IES interlocutory applications will be coming up, then interlocutory applications will be decided, then the issues will be set, right? Issues will be framed, then there will be argument. Before that arguments, there will be like documents will be asked, then examination will be happening, the witness examination will be happening, marking of documents will be happening. Then what will happen? Arguments will be there from other side, and both the sides will be argument. Then at the same time, the judgment, the date for the judgment or degree will be given. Then it will be reserved. The court the judge is having authority to reserve the judgment for about 1 month, I think so. So see how much time it will be taking. At least more than 2 years. So if an advocate is going to use these provisions, it will be benefit. Section C, just go with the order any fact to be proved by affidavit. Here affidavit, see, if you are going to lie on an affidavit, that amounts to a perjury. The benefit of this, that if some person says that yes, I genuinely believe in this and this so and so these things are true, if the court allows the affidavit to come into picture. Once he says that he believes it to be true and it turned out to be false, then that constitutes a perjury. And if it is if it is a perjury, then criminal law comes into picture. He will be behind the bars. So look at the importance of section 30, and if you really want to know more about it, go with section 11 and section 12 and 13 also, because all these things are connected. Section 12 is about order 12 is about admissions. Just I would like to know if people are following this or not.
Yeah.
Advocate Mehboob Sahab would like to add something, or what is the time limit? Hello.
Yes, sir. It's been about an hour. Like, it depends on you. When you want to stop, you can stop.
Okay. Until and unless the people are interested.
Mr. Hayaz, you can continue.
Okay, thank you. See, I'm missing all those.
Please continue.
Yeah, thank you. I have missed the summons to witnesses because it will go in detail and it is very much minute in nature. Discussions are that if the summons are to be serviced to the within the state, within the jurisdiction of a state, within the jurisdiction of a court, territorial jurisdiction within the state, then all over India, that are being discussed under the section 31 and section 27 and all those above sections. So that will be more confusing in nature. So we will go in, because that is not needed in AIB, I think so, because they are not asking you those kind of things. Now we will move on to the judgment and decree. Here it comes. The court, after the case has been heard, shall proceed judgment, and on such judgment a decree shall be followed. So what is a decree? A decree is a adjudication. Like if I'm not wrong, it is a reasoning on which the judgment has been decided. So remember that the appeal is allowed on decree, not on judgment. There's a difference between appeal and decree. Decree, what is appealable? It is decree, not judgment. Judgment is like mere reasoning of that. with regard to section 33, I would like to add, that's it. Now we will move on to the interest. Here it is about discussion of interest, how it will be calculated. I think we do not to discuss all these things. So remember section 33, like a bit AIB, which section deals with the judgment and decree. Then section 33 discuss with that. Now we will move on to the most important and very much important for us in the practice, and at the same time, law. Here we could understand the power of law. It's not just about mere philosophical things, right? The most important thing is that it punishes the people, right? Here it comes, the section 35A. Compensatory cost in respect of false or fictitious claim or defenses. Before that, section 35 speaks about, section 35 is the actual section, then section 35A was an amendment, added in an amendment procedure. Just I will read that section 35. See here, you could understand how the subject is changing now. Now we have moved from jurisdiction aspect. Now we have done with the jurisdiction. We have done with the judgment aspect. In between, we have discussed about the interrogatories, section 30, that whole discussion that will be coming in picture when the suit will be happening, the trial, all those things will be happening. So here, if someone is not following the procedure of the court, then what is the remedy? A temporary remedy. It is cost. The court is having authority to impose cost on the person who is not following the procedure of the court, or they are delaying the procedure of the court by not calling upon witnesses, by not producing the evidence, and delaying and taking dates. So at that point of time, what is the remedy that advocate can show to the court, or court is having authority to do? So what court can do? Subject to such conditions. Again, see what conditions and limitations. It is your responsibility to find out. That limitations will be in some other substantive law, or it may be under the civil procedural rules. See the rules that are being drafted by the Andhra Pradesh Telangana High Court. So you have responsibility to go with that. So we will keep aside those subject to conditions and limitations as may be prescribed, and to the provisions of any law. So what is that any law? It is your responsibility to find out which law is being applied here. For the time being enforced, the cost of or incident in all the suit shall be in the discretion of the court, and the court shall have the power to determine by whom or out of what property and to what extent such costs are to be paid, and give all necessary directions for the purpose aforesaid. The fact that the court have no jurisdiction to try the suit shall be no bar to exercise such power. See what beautiful provision is this. Again, where the court directs that any cost shall not be followed, the event the court shall have a reasoning in writing. So here section 35, if we divide, this is of the section 35 is of the two topics are being discussed in this. Here it is like it is a discretion of a court to decide about what cost should be imposed by the court on the suit or on the incident. But at the same time, if it is a disputed fact that does this court have a jurisdiction, or at the same time it is being decided that this court does not have a jurisdiction, that doesn't mean that section 35, the power to impose the cost, is being taken away from that court just because there is no jurisdiction on that court. It is not correlated with the jurisdiction aspect of the court. Once you have approached the court and it is proved that the court is going to impose on you a cost, and you says that no, there is no jurisdiction of a court, then court says that they have a right to impose the cost. Because this section itself says that mere having no jurisdiction doesn't mean that this section is not applicable on that court. Hope you people are following. Then we will go with the section 35A. This is the most important section, and it has impact on those who are litigant people, are always disputing unnecessarily and prolonging the trials, and that itself is like a punishment for the client. So section 35 is a good remedy for those people. I should say to punish those people and remedy for those who are suffering because of these kind of activities. So compensatory costs in case of a false and fictitious claims or defense. In any suit or any or other proceedings, including executive proceedings. Here, I am using the word executive proceedings. This is for the first time I am using executive proceedings. So what is an executive proceedings? That will be coming later on in our discussion. And just to add on with executive proceedings, order 21, which is the longest order in our CPC, which speaks about the executive aspects of the decree. So here, this section 35A is applicable to what kind of things? They are applicable in any suit or other proceeding, including an executive proceedings, but excluding an appeal or a revision or any party objects to the claim or defense on the ground that the claim or a defense or any part of it as against the objector false or fictitious to the knowledge of the party by whom it has been put forth, and if thereof as against the objector such claim or defense is allowed, is disallowed, abandoned or withdrawn in a whole or in part, the court, if it thinks fit, may, after recording its reason for holding such a claim or defense to be false. Here it is, if you want to avail this section 35A for a client, it is must that court should accept that the defense that is being used by the other side was a false claim or a fictitious claim. Make an order for payment to an objector by a party by whom such a claim or defense has been put forth of by cost or by way of compensation. So many a time whenever there is a plaint is being filed, n number of things will be added up with no desire to prove it based on evidence, and you know that you won't be able to prove things if there is a if the court is going to decide the issues on merits, like on merits, which means that there will be an examination. First there will be evidence, then there will be examination of witnesses, then cross examination will be there, and then arguments will be there, and that court will be decided. If these things are going to come into picture, and if I claim something to be, if my claim is based on is a mere statement and I have no documents of that, and if I proceed with that, ultimately the court says that this was a fictitious claim, then at that point of time, the other side, the defendant's counsel, if the court accept that yes, you have brought a fictitious claim, then section 35A can be used against me. First thing. At the same time, the same thing will be applied to the defenses, like fictitious defense. I have no evidence to prove my stand, but mere statement is being produced before the court. I have no documents, no witness for examination, cross-examination, but I know, and I am doing that willfully just to prolong the suit. At the end, when court desires and says that there was such kind of fictitious claim and defense, then I will get a right of compensation. First thing. Then section 35A subclause 2 says that no court shall proceed. The limitations are being discussed. I think I will, by reading that, you will be able to understand, because it will take another few minutes to discuss. Now, here, what a beautiful discussion is there. Section 35A subclause 3. I will highlight that. No person, I will read out. No person against whom an order has been made under this section shall by reason thereof be exempted from any criminal liability in respect of any claim or defense made by. So which means that if I have lied over my oath, if I have filed any affidavit on a mere statement, and I'm aware about that, I am lying over the oath, and the other side has got the compensation against me under section 35A, that doesn't mean that he has exhausted all his legal remedies. He has a criminal remedy from against me, that is under perjury. It could be in any other form, if when we are going to discuss IPC or some other specific crimes, specific statute with regard to criminal law, we will be able to know, which means that only the civil door has been closed, which doesn't mean that the criminal law is not open for the other side. He could approach the criminal court also for the relief against my act. Now we will go with section 35B, which says that causing delay, cost for causing delay. What a beauty! Again, this is also most important. All these provisions are very much important, and with my 1 year of practice, I could understand what's the reason for which there is a prolonged, the case goes prolonged. The most important thing is that dates, we will be getting dates, either witness is not available, either documents are not available. And for all these, to regulate all these things, court has been empowered with these kind of sections, so that the advocates and the client will be on track, or there will be a, because there is a one proverb that justice delayed, justice denied. It is this justice delayed, justice denied is not limited to the criminal aspect. It is very much related to the civil aspect also. And to deliver justice in a very short time, these provisions need to be used in the practice or in our day-to-day affair also. Not limited to the practicing advocate, but also those who are litigant because of their issues, and has done LLB for their own benefit. This kind of provisions will be helpful for them also. Section 35B, just I will go with that. If on any date fixed for hearing of a suit or taking steps. So what is step? The CPC defines steps in a very different way. It's not about, there are different kinds of steps. If you are going to read CPC, hopefully in near future, if Mahmood Bhai allows me, then we will go in detail also at that time. I hope I am going in detail right now also. But because CPC is such a topic that needs some kind of detailing over the subject. Now, if I am reading section 35B, cost for causing delay. If on any day fixed for, if on one date, which means that, hope you could understand at what stage this section will be coming into picture, and at what, how it's going to relieve the client. If on the day fixed for hearing of a suit or for any step therein a suit to file, failed to take steps which has been required by or under the code to take on that day, obtains an adjournment for taking such step or producing evidence on any other ground, the court may, for the reason to be recorded, make an order requiring such party to pay to other party such a cost as would, in the opinion of the court, be reasonably sufficient to reimburse the other party in respect of expenses incurred by him in attending the court on that day, payment of such cost or date so and so. I will not go in detail of that. You could understand this. Here we ends with the part 1 of CPC. Section 35B, from section 1 to section 35B, we have done with the part 1. Then part 2 is about the execution. So here CPC assumes that from section 1 to section 35, the suit has been decided. So if you want to go into detail of, if you want to really understand, because once you step in the practice by just by reading substantive law or just by reading the sections of the CPC, you will not feel the kind of satisfaction, that confidence. When you go with the rules, that orders, rules, and then civil rules of practice, then you get the confidence that you will find the path to achieve those rights that are being discussed in the substantive law. So if you have read from section 1 to section 35, I advise you to read section order 1 to just give me a time. Order 1 to order 20. Order 1 to order 20 discusses about judgment and decree. Order 1 to order 20. Order 1 speaks about parties to the suit, then frame of issues, what are issues, then recognize part 3 discusses about recognition of agents and plaintiff, then institution of suits, that is part order 4, then issues and issue of summons, calling upon witnesses, calling upon parties, defendants, and if they are not going to present before the court, what will be the consequences, and if one plaintiff appears and other plaintiffs are absent, then what court could be taking, what what will be the premise of the court. Then we will go with the section 6, which deals about pleadings, what are pleadings, and here you will be discussing about rejection of plaint, return of plaint, then how striking off pleadings, the court has a right to strike off unnecessary pleadings. Then the plaint discusses about how it should be plaint. Then reliefs have to be very much specific. If you are going to ask a specific relief has to be specific. Then documents on which you are going to rely. It is not necessary that you should produce the documents then and there itself, because you are going to use section 30 and order 12 and order 13, that is interrogatories and evidence. If those documents are with the other side, you could ask them. The court will not be asking you on the very date of the presentation of plaint that where are documents. It will take time, and the plaint itself says that you have a right to produce those documents over when the trial commenced. Then return, statement, set off, and counterclaim. Yes, I would like to know from you people that are you aware about difference between set off, return statement, and counterclaim? Hello.
Yes, we are aware.
Yeah, fine then. So then we will move on. The order 9 speaks about non-appearance of parties. Non-appearance of parties, that deals with the ex parte degrees, right? Ex parte degrees are the most important degrees, because once ex parte degree, we all are aware about what is ex parte degree. Once degree has been ex parte, then what are the relief that we have? Either you need to file setting aside of an ex parte degree under order 9 or order 13. At the same time, that ex parte degree, you could go and appeal under order 40. There are 2 reliefs for that. Next, we will go with the order 10, that is examination of parties by the court. See, remember that examination of parties by the court under order 10, you could understand at what stage this will be coming into picture. This comes examination of by the parties. It will be coming with the interrogatories. A court will be having an authority to ask question to anyone by the party. It is not saying examination by the it is not saying that examination of parties by the other side or by the parties. It's saying that examination of parties by the court. So even judge is having a right to ask questions. That has been discussed. Then discoveries and inspections, that is order 11. Admissions is the most important thing. Order 11, which discusses about admissions. So here it is not necessary for you to go fight for the case till end and get the judgment or degree in your favor. If you are going to use all these provisions in a very proper manner, in a rightful, on a specific stage, that admission, if you ask something from other side, and if the court says that it is your duty to answer these questions, and if he is not going to answer that questions, and if he is going to answer that questions, and if it amounts to an admission, then there is no question of framing the issues, and there is no question of trial, and the court will be adjudicated in your favor. It is not necessary that you need to go till the end of till the trial, and then court will be deciding on merits. Then we will move on to the impounding, return of documents. Finally, the suit of issue determined upon framing of issue will be there. Here comes the order 14. From order 14, the trial of the suit starts. Before that, it's all about the preliminary stage of the suit. Then order 15 discusses about disposal of suit at the first hearing. Then order 16 about summoning and attendance of witness. Here it comes the summoning and attendance of witnesses for the examination, for the cross examination of by parties. like what we, hello? Someone,
Yes, sir.
someone has called, I think so.
I've closed the mic. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
yeah. See, what is the difference between order 16 and order 10? Examination of parties by the court. Here the word courts comes into picture. If I'm not going to the detail, but just I want to make, I want to draw a difference between that. Then order 16 says that summoning and attendance of witnesses. In both of these cases, the examination will be done. But in order 10, it will be done by the court. The court has a right to ask for. But in the case of summoning of and attendance of witnesses, it is like the parties to the suit will be asking the court to call upon the witnesses for examination, or it has it asking the court to recall the witnesses if they have not properly examined them, if they are not satisfied to that examination. Now we will go with the section 16 subclause A with regard to the detained is confined. Here see, attendance of witnesses confined or detained in prison. By reading those sections with regard to the attendance of witnesses in the section part, you will not go into the details of that. Here, the CPC is trying to differentiate between the witnesses and persons in the different circumstances. So, section 16 subclause A, attendance of witnesses confined or detained in prisons. So, sometime it is a need for that person to come into picture and before the court to deliver his testimonies, right? So, the code has tried to give a chance to that person also, and that is in the rules, not in sections. This is the importance of rules, because in the whole litigation, the whole history of litigation, things come diagonally, not parallelly. It will come in a very different aspect. It is your application of law that will be helping you. Now moving on with the adjournments. That is, see, now you could understand why I'm saying that section 20 ends with the first phase of the judicial process or judicial journey of a suit. You will be asking adjournments. So here it discusses about to what extent adjournments can be given by the court and what will the consequences of adjournments if there is a prolonged adjournment, what is the remedy. That is section 148. Section 148, yes, it deals about the adjournment petition is there. That order is going to discuss that provision in detail. Then we will move with the hearing of suit and examination of witnesses. Here again, examination comes. See, order 16, order 18, order 10. All are somewhere related to the witnesses examination. The subject matter is same somewhere. That is what is there. Here, hearing of witnesses and examination of witnesses. Somewhere, if you want to understand this rule in a very comprehensive manner, then you should have an idea of Evidence Act. What Evidence Act says with regard to the evidence, with regard to the witnesses, with regard to the consequences of admissions, what kind of admissions are there, and there is a specific section is there with regard to the persons who cannot be called upon when they for the test, for the examination, like if a person is dead or if a person is unsound mind, if a person is not available. And in that hearing of suit and in the examination of witnesses, if you are aware about that provision, that part of the CPC, then you could be able to apply here in practice in procedural aspect. There are few exceptions on that in the same way that is being discussed in section 18. Then section 19 is about affidavits. Every time CPC says that affidavit or power to order attendance of deponent for cross-examination. This is a section order 19 rule 2 speaks about matters to which the affidavit should be confined. See, affidavit is like, and there is no need for deduce evidence on affidavit, because you are saying that you are aware about that. And if it is wrong, or if it is you have done it willfully, then it amounts to perjury. So many a time court allows you to do that, because if you are unable to produce evidence to prove your points. So order 19 regulates that conduct. Then comes the order 20, which speaks about judgment and decree. That discusses in detail. Then order 22A speaks about costs. The same cost that is being discussed under order section 35, 35A and 35B in a very in a very solid, I should say, in a very solid manner. Here it has some divergence, some varieties there with regard to the cost. So here I should say that we have end the part 1 of CPC, a window to part 1 of a CPC, not in detail. Again, I will say we have not discussed CPC in detail, but just I have tried to build a desire in you to read CPC. I'm going to conclude. If you have any doubts, hopefully, I think I would give you some clarity over doubts, but I would not, in many questions, I wouldn't be able to satisfy you. But here it's like reading together, let's assume in that way. I have completed my session.
Thank you so much, Mr. Reyes. Anyone wants to ask any question on the thing being said so far? Okay. Anyone wants to ask anything? Okay, I'm not getting any message, any response. So if you could close your screen, Mr. Reyes.
Yeah. Wait for a while. I will do that.
Just click on stop sharing.
Yeah.
You have closed your video actually.
What you have said?
You have closed your video. No worries, I'll stop it from here. 1 second.
Okay.
Just close the screen share, please.
I am unable to do that.
You are unable to do that?
Wait. Yeah. Close. Now,
Yes. Okay, can you open the video? Okay, that's it. You want to close your video or what?
I can open. Yeah, no problem.
Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Reyes. It has been a wonderful session so far, and I believe I love your passion. I love your experience which you have brought so far in the class. We are very much thankful to you for delivering this session, and I hope and pray that in the coming days you get more chance to speak to us a lot.
If you have any review with regard to the subject, I will be happy to get the review of about 2 sentences. That's it. Anything that you think that I need to improve, I will be willing to listen. That matters a lot.
Sure, Mr. Reyes. Overall, it looked good, and I'll just want to end the recording and end the session now. Thank you so much. It's been about 10 p.m. now. So thank you so much and have a great evening then. Thank you so much.
Yeah.